Good day and welcome to World Class Rendering with Onshape. I'm Jay Tedeschi, Product Manager here at Onshape. And for the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce you to one of our newest tools, Render Studio. The agenda for today is pretty straightforward. We'll begin at a somewhat high level and touch upon how tools like Render Studio and others expand the footprint of the Onshape platform. After that, we'll take a look at Render Studio itself, and I'll show you some examples of Render Studio in use, followed by a brief discussion on the technology which enables Render Studio. Then we're going to move on to a segment I call Blurring the Lines, where we will take a quick look at some techniques you can put to use which will help you blur the lines, so to speak, between real and photoreal. I'm then going to show you a couple of examples of how Render Studio can be used in more of a design role, as opposed to just something we use to render pretty pictures. Finally, Riley Carl, president and co-founder of Dark Arrow, is going to join us for a discussion about Dark Arrow, their use of Onshape, and the value of rendering tools to them. If you have any questions along the way, please enter them via the Social 27 console, and we will get to them. We'll get to as many of them as possible at the end of today's presentation. As we continue to expand the core competencies and depth of capabilities in Onshape, we've also been hard at work increasing the range of its overall coverage as it pertains to what you need to do. Essentially, we are growing the footprint of Onshape, enabling you to tackle a wider range of design problems than ever before. So, what is Render Studio? Well, it's a cloud-enabled render tool that lets you go from this to this, all from within the Onshape platform. And create stunning photorealistic images like this. And this. Most importantly, it does all of this from within the Onshape platform itself, enabling users to visualize their designs and changes to those designs pretty much in real time, using physically accurate lighting and environments. It also expedites new product introduction by allowing users to create market-ready, realistic images without the need for building physical prototypes or setting up photo shoots. Render Studio also helps to improve collaboration because, let's face it, we've all been in design reviews where the engineering drawings themselves just don't get the point across. There is no ambiguity when it comes to images like these. Internal and customer stakeholders see the design in a realistic setting. Finally, Render Studio lowers capital expenses, because unlike other rendering tools which require high-end dedicated hardware and GPUs, it runs in any web browser currently supported by Onshape. So let's take a look now at how it works. So we're going to start off in Onshape itself, and we're going to access the plus menu and create a new Render Studio tab. So from within the Render Studio tab, we will create our scene. So from here, I'm going to select my wheel and tire assembly, and I've got several configurations saved that I'm going to utilize, one of which is specifically for doing renderings. So I'm going to select the tessellation quality, and now we'll let Render Studio go ahead and create our initial scene. So here we are in the Render Studio environment. I'm going to start off by saving this scene. Now, this is advantageous because in an assembly such as what I'm working in right now, I can have multiple tabs or multiple scenes saved, which lets me leverage any saved materials that I have down in the scene appearances area. That's where you save all of your custom materials. Now, Render Studio is an image-based renderer. So as such, we are able to utilize and leverage HDRI images for lighting and environment. And as you can see, I just selected that abandoned parking and used that to light my scene. And now I'm going to use this other HDRI which has a bit more blue in it to render our scene. Now, we're also able to utilize materials or material appearances as they come in from Onshape. I haven't added any specific Render Studio material to any of these objects yet. What I'm doing first is selecting the hub, the wheel hub, and manipulating the characteristics of that appearance so that it looks more powder coated-ish. As you can see, I was able to tweak the amount of reflectivity, the amount of diffusion of light. Now let's take a look at accessing the library of materials in Render Studio. I'm going to filter out those materials using the word stain to get to stainless steel. I right-click on the stainless steel and assign it to the part that I've selected in the Render Studio environment. So let's go through that process again. Now, this is a good process to get in the habit of using once you've used the product enough and know the names of the materials you want to use. For example, I know that these gunmetal appearances are really nice and very flexible with regards to output. So I just found the gunmetal that I wanted, black 50, and I was able to drag it and drop it onto the part. And as you can see, it recognizes that there are instances of the same part, so it applies that material to each of the instances. Now, let's go down and actually take a look and search through the library of materials available to me. I'll select metals, and as you can see by the size of the scroll bar over on the side, there are hundreds and hundreds of metals. My favorite, bare metal. I'm going to apply that to this bolt. And as you can see, again, utilizing instancing, it applies that material to all of the bolts. So let's go back and let's use some of the filtering again. And this time we're going to look for rubber. So I'll type in rub. Let's scroll through. Where is it? There we go. Rubber black. Let's drag it and drop it onto the tire. And now with that, we can tweak some of the characteristics of the material so that it looks more rubber-like. Instead of something that's hard rubber, it looks like something that's a bit more soft rubber, like you would find on a aircraft wheel or aircraft tire. Now, keep in mind that all of these changes are saved down in the Scene Appearances folder. So these can all be utilized. They're kind of like your own custom library once you've applied it once. So now we're able to see the effects of the environment lighting on our object. And everything looks, this looks really good. So I'm going to go ahead and save the scene. And then we're going to move down into our next, hang on one second. There we go. So next segment, design updates. Let's turn our attention now to design updates. Anyone know what the one thing is that never changes? Yeah, the fact that everything changes, and that's especially true of design. It's an iterative process which requires a nimble set of tools to enable designers and engineers to stay on top of it. Fortunately, Onshape and Render Studio provide just that set of tools. So let's take a look now at how we handle design changes with Render Studio. So we're going to go down to our wheel and tire assembly, and we're going to update this to a different configuration. I called it sans threads because I actually went into the fasteners and removed any vestige of threads that were on there to improve rendering time. We weren't going to see them anyway because this is a pretty big tire. So now we're going to go into Render Studio tab. We will select our scene. We'll select change configuration. We'll change it to sans threads. And we'll utilize the fine tessellation. And now we're updating it. Now, the really key thing about this is that all of the materials that I've applied in the previous session are going to be maintained. The only difference is we're going to have some new parts now, new components visible in our scene, as you can see. Now, this is where the iRay instancing really comes into to help, because we're able to select from the scene. You can see over on the left on the scene graph that I'm able to select just one of the screws, and it basically selects all of the screws. So when I apply bare metal to that object, it's applying it to all of the object instead of just one of them. And we can do the same thing again, only this time we can filter out by a part name. So let's enter in 937, and it finds all of the components in the assembly that have a prefix of 937. And again, I can apply this material, bare metal, to those objects as well. So there's multiple ways of accessing the components in the assembly. I can type in hex and get access to all of the hex head screws. Once again, let's apply bare metal to it. So it's a very, very flexible UI with regards to how you interact with the data, how you select materials and appearances and environments, and then apply those to your models. So with that, let's go ahead and save the scene and move on to our next topic, which is essentially talking about Render Studio itself. So let's look at the technology of Render Studio. Let's take a look under the hood, if you will. I'll do my best to explain what's going on with Render Studio that really sets it apart. Render Studio is driven by NVIDIA iRay, which, unlike rendering engines which preceded it, is physics-based. That being, it generates photorealistic images through the simulation of physical behavior of light and materials. It also has the ability to utilize high dynamic range images as environments, which can be used to provide light sources, environment image, or both. iRay is RTX GPU powered and uses NVIDIA's optics ray tracing API. Its implementation in Render Studio, like Onshape itself, is cloud enabled, which means it provides users with almost real-time feedback when creating and editing scenes, as well as manipulating materials and lights. It also features an AI-tuned denoiser, which dramatically reduces the time to render a high-fidelity image that is virtually noiseless. It was developed using the latest deep learning AI techniques, which were used to evaluate tens of thousands of rendered images. This unique capability accelerates the completion of final images, quickly removing noise from the image and giving you almost real-time feedback of your scene's composition and lighting. As it pertains to the material libraries themselves, suffice it to say you will never be at a loss for appearances to use in your scenes using either the extensive library materials or modified and saved materials. MDL differs from other shading languages in that it is physics-based and defines the behavior of light at a very high level. MDL material definitions are constructed from physically based layered elements such as diffuse and specular reflection, diffuse transmission, and more. Render Studio has support for photometric lights, which use an external IES file to describe complex light distribution. This distribution can be oriented in the same way as other emissive elements, but the actual shape, extents, and diffusion of the distribution is fixed by the IES file. I'll be showing you an example of this shortly. Render Studio's camera and lens settings give you full control of film speeds, focal lengths, aperture settings, and more. Essentially, all the controls that would be used to determine the composition of an image if you were actually photographing it. I'll be showing you this as well in the next portion of the presentation that I'm calling, as I alluded to before, blurring the lines. Give me a second here. So what do I mean by blurring the lines? Well, these are some of the techniques that can be used to transform your image from one that is nice to one that is almost impossible to distinguish from a photograph. Some of the techniques are the difference between a rendering and a photorealistic rendering. Okay. First up, environments. Render Studio utilizes image-based lighting, which I described in detail a bit earlier. Image-based lighting is lighting which is derived from a full 360-degree panoramic HDR image. These images capture visible light, exterior lights, the sky's contribution, and most importantly, bounced light. Render Studio uses this lighting information and illuminates the scene. Because of HDR's ability to capture such subtleties in a scene, scenes using these environments are often indistinguishable from photographs. In the first workflow we looked at today, you may remember that I used an environment to illuminate the scene, but did not use it for the scene background. Now we are going to look at a workflow where we utilize this HDR as a background as well. So same, you can see you notice the wheel, but now we've got the wheel at the end of the landing gear, and I'm going to select an HDR file. In this case, it's an 8K HDR. And we're going to apply that as our background. So that image is now supplying the light direction, the light intensity, as well as the image itself, which is what we're looking at as our background. So I'll select a different camera, can get a different view. And finally, this is what that rendered image looks like. So, on to depth of field. Depth of field is one of the most important concepts in photography, and my touching upon this, as well as other photographic techniques, may have some of you asking what any of that has to do with rendering. Well, as I mentioned earlier, these techniques are ones that can take your renders from one that looks good to one that, for all intents and purposes, is indistinguishable from a photograph. Depth of field is probably the most useful of all of these techniques. And if you've used portrait mode on your iPhone, then you've used depth of field to manipulate an image. Let's take a look at it in use. So here we have a side case, or a detailed view of a side case of an engine. And you can see that everything is in pretty sharp detail at this point. So what I'm going to do, similar to if you were taking something like this with an iPhone, you'd like touch that image of the screen, that point on the screen, and it would blur out everything that's closer to that focal point and beyond that focal point, and give us this nice, satisfying depth of field. As a photographer, it allows me to have the viewer's focus drawn to exactly what I want by defocusing on those areas that I don't want someone looking at. And as you can see, it achieves some pretty stunning, realistic images by doing so. So now let's take a look at using Render Studio as a design tool. First up, photometric lights. Photometric lights utilize a data file, which I referred to before, called an IES profile. These files are comprised of bulb and enclosure data measured from their real-life counterparts and are typically obtained directly from bulb and enclosure manufacturers themselves. Here's a sample of some IES profiles, and as you can see, each of the profiles accurately illustrates the intensity and spread data for a given light and enclosure model. Let's take a look at this in use. So here I have a scene of the interior of a living room, and as you can see, I've already got some lamps on the floor with light being emitted from those. Those were emissive lights. From the scene graph, I'm going to select bulb, and we're selecting all of the overhead lamps that are in the room right now, and I'm applying an IES appearance object to those lights. So we'll set the intensity to 50%, and now I'm going to load a 70 watt, 24 degree. So this is a 24 degree cone, 70 watt intensity bulb in those overheads. Now you can actually see the denoiser working here. As you can see, that's a little bit intense. So let's see what it looks like if we use the same wattage of bulb, just with a wider dispersion of light. Now that's far more pleasant, far more appealing. And if I were basically doing the layout of where I wanted to design these, the layout of the overhead lights, I could utilize this model to basically determine that this is the bulb that we want, this is the enclosure that we want, and this is the spacing of the bulbs in the overhead panel that we want. That's pretty good looking. All right, let's now move on to white mode. White mode is another tool that can be used to great effect, especially when working on designs which are more organic in nature, like this burr grinder. There are a number of analytic tools in Onshape itself for evaluating geometric curvature. There's curvature comb display in sketches and on surfaces, as well as curvature continuity visualization via zebra stripes. Well, now we can add Render Studio white mode to the list. Let's take a look at how that works. So it's very difficult to understand the curvature of this model or this burr grinder when we have this highly reflective surface being shown. So from the options in Render Studio, I can select white mode, which essentially allows me to maintain all of my shadows, all of my lights, but sets everything to a flat white material. It's similar to the clay material that auto designers use when they're doing bodywork design. It basically eliminates any reflectivity, and there's basically no ambiguity when I'm trying to interpret the curvature of these this object itself. So with that, let's now move on to our interview with our special guest, Riley Carl, who is president and co-founder of Dark Arrow, along with his two brothers. Riley, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the intro and thanks for having me. I always have a fun time talking about what we're up to, so I appreciate the platform to speak here. But yeah, I can give you a little bit more of a background on myself and talk about what Dark Arrow is and what we're doing there.
Cool.
You want to go to the next slide, I guess?
Yeah, I was going to have a little pun. I was going to say, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your brothers at Dark Arrow and how you got it off the ground, so to speak?
Yeah. Dark Arrow, we're a team of three brothers, and we're engineering an aircraft called the Dark Arrow 1. It's a kit airplane, meaning you can build it in your garage, and it's 2 seats, and it's specifically engineered for high-speed, long-range flight. High speed being around 275 mile an hour target cruise speed, and then as far as range goes, you should be able to fly it from the Midwest to either coast on a single tank of gas. We're located in Madison, Wisconsin, so all the cool stuff like mountains and oceans are kind of far away from us. So that was part of the mission idea, is that we can get to either coast without refueling nonstop.
Wow.
So the picture here is an image of my brother Keegan. This is in our shop, and this is well, it's a little bit of a dated image right now, but it's the kit as a customer would receive it. So we build the airframe structures. It's all carbon fiber and fiberglass composite. So we make the wing, the fuselage, and the tail structures, along with the landing gear and some other hardware. And then we're partnered with a couple of OEMs for the engine, the avionics, canopy, and a couple other hardware items like that. So builder would assemble all this, and then they have an airplane that they can use for recreational use.
Speaking of the landing gear, I grabbed this great image.
Yeah, I like all the examples you picked were, well, the aircraft landing gear and wheels pretty relevant to what we're talking about here. So yeah,
it's kind of why we gravitated towards asking you to join us on this. I was like, with the aircraft theme, it definitely fit.
Yeah. Yeah, so the whole thing was designed in Onshape. We've been using Onshape for a number of years now. And this is just a screen grab of one of the landing gear assemblies, and then I guess the CAD of the whole airframe with the actual landing gear attached this time. So the previous image, the actual kit did not have the landing gear installed there, but this shows basically.
I think I have the next. I think the next picture is actually it. That's the built article.
Yep.
Wow.
So this was taken in December. This was kind of our rollout with the whole full assembly of the aircraft all stuck together. So hasn't flown yet. We're targeting flying the prototype later this year. And then after that, we'll get into manufacturing and shipping kits, which we're really excited about. So yeah, you
Amazing.
can definitely see the carbon fiber airframe and I guess the whole appearance of it.
So how many people at Dark Arrow, are involved in doing design work of this? Is it just
So we all three are, Keegan, River, and I all are, and we've had a number of interns off and on over the years, so they've gotten involved as well between design and testing. But we all use Onshape and we all do design work, but we have coverage of different areas. So kind of the aero and composites guy. So I've done a lot of the airframe work. Keegan's a mechanical engineer, so he did a lot of work with the landing gear and then does a lot of machining. And then River's a computer and electrical engineer, so he's done a lot of the design work with the electrical system architecture and the systems that support that. So all three of us are pretty heavily involved on the design end.
absolutely gorgeous? I can't imagine what the field of view is like from inside the cockpit. That's just spectacular.
Yeah, that was the idea with the bubble canopy. It's kind of hard to beat in terms of visibility, just have completely unobstructed view like that. And it's kind of as close as you can get to being a bird without actually maybe doing something like paragliding or like a wingsuit.
I actually learned to fly with my uncle when I was about 8 years old, and I went through like Cessna 152, 172, and every single time we upgraded to a new plane, I still always felt like the airfield that we flew out of, they had sailplanes there. And I was like, those look like that's what I want to sit in, where it's just like a bubble of glass, and it didn't feel like I was sitting in a car that was flying.
Yeah, fighter jet style, I guess, is the sailplane setup.
That just looks gorgeous.
Thank you.
Absolutely stunning. So let's talk about how rendering benefits, or what benefits do you see rendering bringing to Dark Arrow?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the history of like how we've showcased our product. And initially, when we started, we were just showing CAD images, and then we'd show photos of like what we're actually building. And then along the way, we ended up doing a couple renders. And I think it's been effective to like the engineering types. A decent amount of our customer base is technically savvy or engineering background, so it seems like the CAD models appeal to them, but not everyone is like that. So when we're trying to make product brochures or a website, we're showing what the airplane is going to look like. Before we had the full thing assembled and we just had more CAD, renders are really useful for that, communicating what the airplane is going to look like. And we've put a lot of effort into making our design very sleek, aesthetically pleasing, modern looking, and everyone wants a good looking airplane to fly in. And I think the renders really do a good job of showing that off, showing the clean lines and smooth surfaces that you get with that carbon fiber composite construction. And like going forward, I'm actually really excited to use this Render Studio more, even as a design tool, like you mentioned when you were showing the lighting. Literally a project we're working on right now is adding a glare shield to the instrument panel and seeing, I'd like to play around with that and see, size of the glare shield here. So yeah, this is a render of the instrument panel. So the panel and the displays there are kind of sitting direct sunlight. The displays are made to be sunlight readable, but most, you look at a commercial airliner, they all have glare shields built over the displays. So we're adding that in for a couple of reasons beyond just the visual side of it. But I think that Render Studio, I'm excited to see how effective that glare shield is at blocking or creating a shadow really over the displays.
Interesting. And that's last one.
Yeah, so that's kind of a visualization, in flight, and well, yeah, what it'll look like in the sky with the landing gear retracted and flying to wherever you want to go.
It's gorgeous. All right. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today, and this was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
The fact that I'm an aviation nut helps enormously. I'm super psyched that you were able to join. Seriously. All right, let's move on to our summary here. So as I alluded to earlier, Onshape's footprint is expanding. You saw that earlier today with Greg and Rob. They showed you PCB Studio and frames, I think. You've seen it now with Render Studio, as well as the as well as the changes that we're making to core Onshape itself. We are adding these adjacent technologies that, as I pointed out, enable us to tackle a wider range of design problems. Render Studio itself facilitates basically makes it easier to create assets that can be used to collaborate with key stakeholders. It removes any of the ambiguity that, as I pointed out earlier, I've been in design review meetings countless times where, we were looking at an engineering drawing and there's inevitably going to be several people that, I don't know what I'm looking at. And there is no ambiguity when you're looking at something like the images we just saw of Riley's, of the Dark Arrow 1. Nice, Dark Arrow 1. Finally, we look forward to speaking with you guys on the forums and seeing what kind of successes that you've had and getting feedback on what you like, what you don't like, where we can improve with regards to Render Studio. I think we have some time left now where we can take some questions and answers from my man Jake.
All right, Jay, we had some good questions come in. I think a good one to start with would be that, are there any plans to provide training materials to users? First-time Render Studio users might find all the terminology and workflow overwhelming.
Ooh. Yeah, I believe we're working on that. As this is beta right now, I don't think any of that is ready, but I know the documentation is in place. I'm not positive about the training material, but I know that we're working on that.
Awesome. Next one, do we know which graphics instances are used by Render Studio, and can you describe the power that users are getting on the back end versus how it would compare if they were using an on-premise system?
Well, I mean, as I pointed out before, you guys saw multiple instances where what you saw was real thing. There was no editing involved other than those last few examples. I actually just, I think I recorded about 1.5 minutes and I sped them up by like 1.15% so that they basically just to get that example done in about a minute, right around a minute. But my point being that you saw the combination of the fact that we're not using local resources. This is all done via web resources, or like an AWS type deal. And so you essentially, you couldn't affordably build a local machine to do what we're able to do. Like I pointed out at that one slide where I was talking about the financial aspect of it, Render Studio gives you a tool that would cost you just a fortune if you were trying to build something that performed with equivalency locally. There is no way to do it. I mean, I can't, I just can't put it into words. It's having these web-enabled tools opens up a lot of windows, and not only with Onshape itself, as with the collaboration in Onshape, but as you're seeing now in tools like Render Studio, later this year with simulation, you are getting access to like just banks and banks and banks of GPU acceleration that it's just not feasible to do that in a local machine. I think that answered the question. Bit long-winded, but I got there.
Jay, how are the environments in the library created? Is it possible to use a camera to capture an environment somehow with a mobile device and then apply it to the model?
I don't know any mobile devices that do HDRI capture. That's a good question. You can capture your own environments. Done it previously. I rented equipment that records HDRI images. If you had access to, pretty sure you could do it with a DSLR. Just capturing, you'd need a Stitcher software to put everything together into that 360-degree spherical environment. But you can do HDRI high definition, or I'm sorry, high dynamic range capture with the DSLR. I don't know of any mobile phones that you can do that with, but basically, if you have the right equipment, yes, you can capture your own environments.
Awesome. Jay, what kind of computer are you using?
I'm actually, I was running this on a 2013 Mac Pro desktop, the garbage can. That's, I mean, that is a 2013 machine. Still cranks because Onshape is web-based. So I don't suffer any ill effects of it being an almost 10-year-old machine. Anyway.
Great. Can I use my own textures in Render Studio?
Absolutely. Yeah. You probably saw when I'm trying to think of what part it was, at the first demo that I did where I was manipulating the materials where they come in from Onshape. So you select an object on the screen and you go to the appearance tab over on the right side and you can see all of the characteristics of the material. Now, I had not applied any materials from Render Studio's appearance library. Those were essentially the appearance characteristics that came in from Onshape itself. In several characteristics of the appearance of the material, you can apply a file. You can actually select a file. Like, for example, if I wanted to do something with, let's say that I got a good example. I know I brought up powder coating, and I referenced that paint kind of looked like powder coat. One of the aspects of powder coating is a thing called orange peel. In fact, the built-in paint for powder coating in Render Studio has an orange peel setting. But if you didn't have that, or you wanted to do your own, you could use a photograph that had a high dynamic range of contrast between light and dark, and that would give you that bumpy texture. You could apply that file as a texture map to basically apply that type of visual finish to the material itself.
Thank you, Jay. We have a question from Foster. I'm really excited about what you've shown in Render Studio. Are there animations in Render Studio?
There are not right now. That is definitely that's definitely in our on the map of where we want to go with it. But Greg Brown has actually done some. We'll probably find out how he did it, but he's a very patient soul, and he did some turntable type operations where he then rendered and then moved it and rendered. You could actually probably do it right in Render Studio itself with the transformation, because you can select, there is a transform matrix so that any object in a scene can be selected and then manipulated. And yeah, I think you could probably just rotate the camera and then just capture an image, then rotate the camera a little more, capture another image, rotate the camera a little more, capture another image. So, and then put all that together, and boom, you got an animation.
Awesome. And this might have the same answer, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is it possible to adjust the degree of perspective inside of Render Studio?
Yeah, it's not the it's similar, but it's not the same. And yes, that goes into, remember earlier I was talking about the lens settings. So those lens settings, for example, when I set the depth of field, I don't know if you guys, the audience, I don't know if you saw, but you're able to set what the actual aperture setting is. I was able to go in and set the number of aperture blades. That definition allows you to control the bokeh, like for lights or reflections which are out of focus. Bokeh refers to how soft or hard that disk of light is. So for example, if I had 16 blades in an aperture looking on the inside of a lens, that would give me a somewhat faceted, if that light reflection were closer to being inside sharp focus in the depth of field, then you'd see more of a definition of those faces of the aperture itself. Field of view is one of those settings in a lens. So all of the camera and lens settings are available and can be tweaked. So That's kind of a long-winded answer, but I used it as an opportunity to describe or tell you more about everything that's accessible regarding camera settings inside of Render Studio.
Thank you, Jay. Does Render Studio support export of GLB or GLTF 2.0 files?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
All right, well, we'll find that out another time. Are there current wood grain materials?
Yeah, there are. I should have pointed it out when I was in that where we were showing the IES files. I had that living room scene, and I kind of geeked out for about a day on that coffee table. Saw image of a coffee table that I thought was unique. This was after I had started working in that living room model. And so I just whipped it up really quick in a part studio. It had a metal frame with cutouts, and in the cutouts at the bottom was a big block of wood. And I applied some of the wood material, the wood grain material from the appearance library. And what just is completely mind-blowing is the level of detail that are in those materials. It's the NVIDIA MDL, material definition language, because you're looking at it, and I'm convinced that there's this grain structure in there. I mean, you actually see the grain structure, but it doesn't exist at all. The model is entirely flat. It's just a single face with this wood grain applied to it. It's just mind blowing. So yeah, again, answer to the question is yes, there's wood textures available. There's stone, there's foam, there's rubber, there's air, there's fog, there's water. There's a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay, for all that question and answering. That seems to be the end of the moderated queue.
All right. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Riley. I really appreciated this time to basically show you what we got coming, what you've got in your hands right now, and hopefully opened your eyes to some possibilities with regards to how you're using these tools.